Okay, we're going to go ahead and make a start for today. So again, welcome to everyone to session 7. In our session today, we're going to be talking a little bit about data collection, and specifically we're going to be talking about validity and reliability. Next week, we're going to look at interpreting data, and specifically we're going to spend most of the next session talking about how to code qualitative data. I know that all of you have received the materials for session 8. I sent them out this morning. If you haven't received them, let us know after the session today. But there is the learning log for session 8. It's really important that you do complete that in advance, and it is a coding exercise. So you might need to do a bit of reading before you're able to do that. But we're actually going to be discussing your coding exercise as well as some general information about coding in that next session. So today, we're going to be talking about data collection, and the question that we're trying to answer is how do we ensure that the data that you collect is valid and reliable? So what we're going to do today is, I know that you will have read a little bit about validity and reliability in preparation for today, but I'm going to give some really quick, short definitions of validity and reliability, and we're actually going to kind of create a fictitious research question that we're going to work through as a way to explore validity and reliability. As a reminder, we don't have Chris with us this afternoon. She did let us know earlier today that she wasn't feeling well, and so she went home early from school today. And we do expect Georgette to be joining us because we did speak with her this morning, and as soon as she joins, we'll just kind of incorporate her into the discussion. So to set the scene for our discussion today, I want to pose this hypothetical research question. And the research question is, how will a physical wellness intervention affect the health of the participants in this action research course? And if you could just think about that question for a moment, and if you will, again, use your yellow hand and raise your hand to just kind of give some feedback about whether or not that question is a good question. If it is a good question, what makes it a good research question? If you don't think that it's such a good research question, what is it missing? So again, if you could take a look at that hypothetical question that we're going to be using for the first part of this session, and again, respond to, is this a good question? What makes it good? Is it not good? Barbara? So someone from Barbara's space.
I think it's okay because it isn't a yes or no answer.
Yep.
How there's scope to obviously measure because it's physical. There's various things that you can measure to for the research, for the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Anjali?
To me, it looks like that there are some identifiable variables that the research question has, which is health of the participants in the course. But health is very broad to me. What I'm thinking is if it was specific, what do you mean by health? What is one specific aspect? Is it mental health? Are we talking about, because we did talk about physical wellness in the question, but which type of health? What kind of health are we talking about? Mental health, physical health, stamina, or is it attention span? So what is that one variable that can stand out in addition to the question being more open-ended? That could have been another possibility here.
Great, thank you for that. Absolutely. In a research question, sometimes it's difficult to strike the balance between putting too much detailed information into the research question and not putting enough. And some of the things that Barbara pointed out, the fact that it is a complex, open-ended question, the how will rather than does physical wellness affect the health of the participants in the course, is a really good first thing to look at to make sure that the question can't be answered by a simple yes or no answer. The focus bit is the second part to pay a lot of attention to. And while parts of it seem focused, one of the things that it focuses, it says exactly who is going to be the kind of the subject of the research, the course participants. But as Anjali pointed out, this term health is a very, very big term as it's used the second time. It talks about physical well-being in the beginning, but health at the other end. So it's Georgia joining by Skype. So if you just kind of let us. Yeah, she's just trying to. What you heard is you heard her trying to come through our Skype on our computer. She joined by Skype instead of.
I put the phone down.
Me too. I was panicking. I don't think we didn't have control over it, Barbara.
Oh, Stephanie
We
did.
thought we did, but we didn't. We were pressing madly, but we didn't have any control.
Stephanie, did you want to add anything to that before we go on?
Well, I wasn't a fan of the question. To me, it felt a bit vague because it just seemed like you could answer, well, I presume it would affect it positively, but it didn't. Yeah, it just didn't seem to lay enough give enough information about
Great.
the question in general.
Yeah. So one of the things that this course may have ruined you for is being able to look at anyone's research question and kind of accept it at face value. Because the fact that you've kind of gone back to your research question week after week as part of this exercise of before we move on to the next bit, go back and revisit the question, it's a really key part of actual research. And you can see how a question necessarily evolves over time as your thinking and planning around the project evolve with it. So we're going to kind of stay with this question as flawed as it is, and we're going to talk about how you would actually investigate this question. So if you have this question, there are loads and loads of data collection methods that you can use. And just for the sake of the discussion, I'd like to suggest that you could use surveys or questionnaires. You could use actual physical health assessments where you might measure heart rate. You could do a small, simple stress test kind of thing where you have someone walk for a certain amount of time and measure heart rate. You could ask the participants to keep journals, and you could analyze those journals as a way of collecting data around the question. One of the things that is obvious here is that by using these different tools, you're going to be collecting different kinds of data with different qualities. So let me go down here to the question on the bottom, and the first, you can answer either of these, whichever one seems to make sense to you. But why would you collect so many kinds of data? And if you look at the types of data that I've suggested, would that data be quantitative or qualitative? And what do we mean by that? So again, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to respond to any of those. We'll start with Angela.
Right. The reasons we want to use different kinds of data is to follow that, theory of triangulation, because we want to approach the same problem or the question from different aspects that can help us give multiple sources of data. That's the reason why we want to use different kinds of data to cross-check our validity, have more reliable results. And the data can be quantitative and qualitative. Definitely yes. It can be a combination of two. If we are talking about our observations on students, that could be more of qualitative. Getting some evidence from surveys, that could be more quantitative, and a good combination of two would suffice.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
Exactly what I would have said. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the other things I want to throw out here, and again, there'll be things that you're really familiar with. It's important to recognize that some of these data collection methods are self-reported, and some of them are measures that are done by kind of people outside the person who's actually participating. And part of the reason that you use triangulation, part of the reason you're collecting these multiple sources of data is that self-reported data has a value, but you actually want to cross-reference that with data collected by someone else that is trying to measure or collect data about the same thing to ensure that self-reported data is accurate. And again, you'd be able to think of a lot of reasons why someone might want to misrepresent data in self-reported data in order to make themselves look like they have healthier daily practices, or that they don't sneak off in the evening and have a big bag of crisps at 11 o'clock at night while they're having trouble falling asleep. So important to also, again, in this balance is this idea of how much do you rely on self-reported data and how much do you rely on data that's measured using other means. But absolutely correct, collecting multiple data for the purposes of triangulation, collecting a mix of qualitative and quantitative data. And as I said, next week we'll be looking at some methods for taking qualitative data and turning it into quantitative data through coding. So, let me get back to it.
Oh, it's nice to know.
So we're going to work again through this hypothetical question that we started with, which is how can a physical wellness intervention affect the health of the participants in this course? And we're going to propose some different ways that we might measure that. And the first one is by using some records of actual diet. So what are people actually eating? Their actual exercise. How are they exercising on a daily basis? How are they maintaining fitness? Maybe looking at things like food preferences, and also collecting things like physical data. And again, all this information can be collected through self-reported sources like surveys and questionnaires, or it can be reported by external methods, which is actually observing people in terms of what they're doing and what their physical health is. All right, so I'm going to propose that if you were doing part of this research, you would be using a questionnaire or a poll, and there would be a whole series of questions. And just for the purposes of this scenario, we're going to look at 2 questions today. The first question is, did you eat breakfast or exercise last week? It's a yes or no question. And do you like chocolate cake? Again, a yes or no question. If we start with that first question, actually, let's go back and quickly, a quick question about how effectively do those questions address the research question. Again, as a reminder, the research question is, how will a physical wellness intervention affect the health of the participants in the course? So again, if you could raise your hand, 2 questions just to start with. They're completely hypothetical, but how effective would those be in addressing the research question?
Perfect for the question.
Go back and, Barbara, go ahead. Yeah. Here are the questions again.
The first one is okay. You know, I mean, it's a bit vague. It's 2 things in one question, but the second one, does it matter if you like chocolate cake? I mean, you can like chocolate cake, doesn't mean you eat it every day for breakfast.
Okay.
You know,
So I want to take a look at both of these questions now and examine them in terms of their reliability and their validity. Next slide. So when we're talking about reliability, a question with a good reliability measures the information reliably. And that just means that if you were to ask that same question multiple times, you get the same results. So question 1 is intended to measure if participants have healthy habits like eating breakfast and exercising. And Barbara pointed out, if we go to the next slide, that one of the real problems with that question is that it's actually a double question. It's asking you, did you eat breakfast last week? And did you exercise last week? So the data that you collect from that question, if you get a yes response, it could mean 3 different things. It could mean that you ate breakfast last week. It could mean that you exercised last week, or it could mean that you ate breakfast and exercised last week. But again, one of the things that it doesn't really get at, and again, Barbara alluded to this in the next slide, is that if any of those things that you did were actually healthy or unhealthy. So if you ate breakfast every day last week, was it a healthy breakfast or was it an unhealthy breakfast? If you exercised last week, was it vigorous exercise or was it rather passive exercise? And when you begin to think now of all of the different combinations that a yes or a no response could mean to that particular question, what you begin to see is that it has a very, very low level of reliability, as it turns out, because you could get lots of different interpretations of that question. And so what I would like you to do is to think about how you would change that question to make it more reliable. And again, I'd like you to raise your hand and talk about how you would change the question to make it more reliable. And again, by reliable, we mean that every time you would ask the question, people would respond with a similar response because you'd be eliminating as much confusion as you, or as much ambiguity as you possibly can. So
is it just one question, Ben?
Give them a checklist of foods that they want to eat. Yeah. Engage in what they're eating. Like give them a question afterwards.
And
so Stephanie.
no, I just want to ask, So we can only have one question. We can't break it down into more than one
You
question.
can do whatever you want to do with it, whatever you need to do to make it better, to make it more reliable. Anjali, go ahead.
What I came up with was slightly different, and I made it one question. How many times over the last week have you missed your breakfast? And then I'm giving them options: once, maybe two, twice, maybe thrice, and 4 times. I'm giving them a scaling factor in order to ask them. If they say, okay, I've missed it 3 times, or I haven't missed any, that could be another option.
Okay. Barbara or Chantal?
No, sure.
No, very similar to what Anjali was saying, which is give some sort of scale on. So you want to know, do these people eat breakfast regularly? That's really what you want to know. And you want to know what kind of food do they eat for breakfast. Then the second part is, do they exercise regularly, and what kind of exercise and the duration of that exercise. So it actually becomes quite a few more components if you want to have a very accurate piece of data that you can say, this definitely shows a healthy lifestyle, or this definitely does not. I think the yes or no option is probably not a good way to go. Yeah.
Yep. So again, combining what Chantal just said with what Anjali said, that you could go to that question of how many times per week do you eat breakfast, or how many times a week do you miss breakfast, and then Chantal's suggestion of actually using an open-ended question: what do you typically eat for breakfast, is a much better way to collect the data. And again, even though the what do you typically eat for breakfast presents an open-ended data where you're collecting qualitative data, you can then go back and look at all that qualitative data, and through coding you can turn it into quantitative information. So even though it might seem that instead of getting frequency of response, or frequency of days, you're getting a bit of another kind of data that may not be compatible, but there are ways to take that qualitative data and to quantify it. So a good suggestion: break it down into smaller pieces, ask more specific questions about frequency, perhaps add some open questions in order to gain together information in terms of what type of exercise or what types of foods. Great suggestions. Is anything else?
And to check that it is objective and it's not your opinion about what is healthy or not healthy, is you then need to back that up with research about, carbohydrates, macronutrients, micronutrients, what is expected of a balanced breakfast, etc., and check for those factors in the answers. And the same thing with the types of exercise and the amount of exercise. But as we said before, I think Anjali mentioned this right at the beginning, health is such a broad topic, because if I'm 50 and I do 30 minutes of walking every morning, and I'm 20 and I do an hour of running twice, you need to have a lot of information and knowledge before you can make some kind of judgment with that information.
Yeah.
I
Careful what you ask, basically what I'm saying.
I belong to this to this thing since I lived in the UK, and it's about taking surveys, and you can earn money. And I still get the surveys, so I've done quite a lot of these surveys because I find it quite interesting how they do it. And with this week, it kind of made me think of that. And they ask a lot of questions, so it would be, how old are you? What gender are you? And then there's a lot of tick boxes, but some of the questions are pretty similar. And you think, oh, they keep asking me the same thing. You've got to check off this, check off that, So it really is quite an interesting science, this whole surveys.
Yeah.
These marketing surveys, that's obviously what they are, But I don't know, for some reason I enjoy taking them.
Yeah. No, and Barbara, in just a moment we're going to talk a little bit about why you would use multiple questions around a similar topic. And of course, one of the things that they're trying to get there is they're trying to see if you're answering a similar question in a consistent way to understand just the reliability within your own responses. again, it's a really important thing in any self-reported survey that you answer similar questions in a similar way and that you're not actually changing your mind, not necessarily because you have different views, but because you're actually trying to answer the question based on what you think the expected response might be. Chantal, really great points that you made, that you can even ask people what they eat and how much they exercise, but if you don't understand things like portion size or intensity of that exercise, you may still not have enough data to actually tell you to actually give you information about what you're trying to find out. And again, when you begin now translating kind of this idea and this kind of thinking to developing tools for collecting data around student learning, it begins to really show you just how complex these kinds of tasks can be. All right, I want to switch gears just a little bit now and talk a little bit about validity. And when we talk about validity, we're looking at questions that measure what they're supposed to measure. Again, with our scenario here, we're talking about healthy eating habits. And so the question is, do you like chocolate cake? And that was meant to kind of begin to get at whether or not you have healthy eating habits. So looking at that question, how could you change that question or enhance it so that it has better validity, so it's actually trying to measure what you're trying to measure, which is something about healthy eating habits? What would you do to that question? Stephanie.
You could ask about frequency. So how often do you eat chocolate cake?
Okay.
Yeah, how often and how much?
And how much? So yeah, so portion size and frequency.
Also give them some choices like sugar, sugar-free, more
Gluten-free, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
if they had a choice, like
Yeah, or is chocolate cake a regular fixture in your life?
Yes.
You know, because
Yeah. An interesting thing here, when you think about chocolate cake, all chocolate cakes are not equal. And there's chocolate cake, and then there's chocolate cake, and then there's chocolate cake with chocolate icing, and there's chocolate cake with chocolate mousse and chocolate icing. And that even a simple thing like chocolate cake may not be descriptive enough to actually get at validity, so that someone who might just be eating chocolate cake is just a slice may have a much different idea about how healthy it is. Angela, you had something you wanted to add.
I was just going to extend to what you said, Ben, that, having this question, do you like chocolate cake, may not solve the purpose of the survey or the research question that I have. Instead, I may want to have some information about chocolate cakes or some recent study or a survey that has been published, and I may ask for some responses from respondents commenting on it. Do you agree or you don't agree that chocolate cakes, according to recent survey, have been found to be unhealthy or they have so much element? Like I said, chocolate cake to me would be different from how you perceive as a chocolate cake, what kind of icing, what kind of elements, and do you read it as gluten-free or do you read it as suitable for vegetarians? So it's going to be very, very difficult as a question. So I may not have this question at all, but if I was deciding to have it, I may support it with some evidence from a recent survey so that my survey is not just collecting responses, but also collecting some informed responses.
Great, thank you for that. And again, one of the things that I'm trying to kind of lead up to is this idea that when we begin kind of transferring these ideas of validity and reliability to the work that we do with students, that a question like, do you enjoy reading, becomes a question that, that there are lots of things that you can do to that question to increase its validity and its reliability. And again, that's what I'm going to be challenge you to do as we work through research proposals and developing data collection methods for the projects that you're writing about right now. I did want to make one more point about question sets, and this goes back. A couple of people have kind of referred to this, that in order to actually be able to say something with confidence in terms of interpreting your results, that typically we use question sets, and question sets may include a whole series of questions that either break a bigger question down into smaller parts. And for example, what you see on the screen right now, this, and again, this is very similar to things that you suggested. So if you're looking at activity levels, you could first ask how many days a week do you do this activity? And then in this example, they're actually looking at different kinds of activities. So walking fast for exercise versus other walking just to get places versus jogging and running. Again, you could have used a more open-ended response to this and just let people write in wherever they want. But if in your particular study you're interested in specific forms of exercise, you may actually ask some specific questions and then follow that with a anything else kind of question. But question sets become really important in building validity and reliability into your data sets, because you want to have enough questions that every question is specific and focused and asking only one thing so that the person would respond to it in the same way every time. And you're collecting data sets that are really trying to get at that question that you're trying to ask. All right, so I want to kind of now just give you a really quick example of an improved question, one that with any luck begins to actually have better validity and reliability. So this question, the third question in this poll, within the past 24 hours, how many vegetables have you eaten? And in this case, because the term vegetables is a very open-ended way, one of the other things that you can do in a question when necessary is to actually provide a definition. So in this question, it says vegetables are fist-sized portions of cooked and uncooked vegetables, salads, and potatoes. So again, what I'd like you to do is look at this question and tell me how you would change it to increase it, either increase the reliability or increase the validity. And if you can say which of those two things you're trying to increase by the changes that you're making.
The time period given is too short.
No, you should eat a certain amount of it, but potatoes needs to.
Angeli?
What kind of it?
Well, one of the aspects I was thinking about that was about that I would not have within the past 24 hours, because I need to collect some data which is spanning over a time period to actually understand the healthy eating habits, if I was trying to look at that as my purpose of having this question. And then I also am not sure about the word salads and potatoes. So
Okay.
I may not have, this as a definition. I may have something else as a definition, but I'm not sure what that would be. But to me, it looks like definition isn't a proper definition. And secondly, 24 hours is not a good time period that I'm looking at. Because maybe over the last 24 hours, this person was traveling and they just didn't happen to find any breads to eat, unfortunately.
Okay. So how would you change the question? How would you phrase it?
In a typical week.
Yes, maybe.
Typical, I like that word.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's important.
So changing the time duration to a week so that it actually takes into account the fact that people might not have regular daily eating habits based on their activity patterns.
But I think the word typical is a good inclusion, because as Angela was saying, what if you're traveling or you're on holiday that week or your circumstances are different? So I think within a typical week, I think that's a good word to add.
And also, potato needs to come out there because it's not a vegetable.
Well, that could be a plate of fries, couldn't it? Yeah, I eat them every day.
We eat potato chips.
Yeah, so no, I guess, again, in this one, even though they've defined portion, what they've not done is define preparation. And in fact, you could prepare these vegetables with loads of sugars or loads of other things added to them. Potatoes could have butter and sour cream and salt and all of those kinds of things on top of them, rather than just being potatoes. What else might you change? Stephanie.
I can't get past the grammar, Ben. Within the past 24 hours, how many vegetables have you eaten? No.
Yeah, and believe it or not, this is from an actual survey. This isn't something that I made up.
Well, I'm thrilled that you didn't write it yourself, and then everything. So I can't get past the poor English right now.
Yeah, so Stephanie, one of the things that sometimes happens in surveys is there's a real disconnect between the questions and the answers. So what if there's the disconnect between the questions and the answers? Which of those things does it affect most, reliability or validity?
I guess it would be reliability.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, it would be both.
No, well, but it might affect both, but reliability especially, because someone might look at that and they might make up their own set of rules for how they actually answer that question. Yeah, because
I would, yeah.
It's not obvious. So how would you fix that? That's a huge flaw in this question. How would you fix that?
Well, I'd change no to none.
Okay.
And then I would remove all of the yeses and just give the options.
Yeah. Great. Now, those are really good suggestions.
Yeah. 1 to 2, make it a range. 1 to 2, 3 to 4, like that.
Yeah. One of the other things that sometimes happens in questionnaires is that people use scaled responses, but they're the wrong kinds of scaled responses. So it could be that the responses could be based on frequency, they could be based on desirability, they could be based on a whole range of things. But sometimes you'll see that people are trying to use the same scaled response, the same set of scaled responses, but sometimes the questions don't lend themselves to that particular scaled response. So again, by having a set of responses that don't match the question exactly, you're reducing the reliability, because you're giving people the option of making up their own rules about how to use the responses. And really important
thing.
Right,
and then that lack of reliability influences the validity.
Well, the validity has to do whether you're measuring the right thing or not. And by
I was thinking about the validity of the survey, of the validity of your source.
Oh, right. So it yes, yeah. That suddenly you have a whole set of data that isn't really valid, and that's using validity in a slightly different way. I mean, you're talking about statistical validity. This is validity within the question itself. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but great to note that, because that word is used in those two different ways. All right. What I want to do now is I want to give you time to talk about the information that you recorded around your own ideas in Learning Log 7.1. 7.1 is a fairly, it's not a lengthy set of questions, but they're really kind of meaty questions. And I'm going to give you about 20 minutes, and you're going to do this as paired discussion. So Chantal and Stephanie, I'm going to have you guys work together since you're naturally in the same space. And then, I'm sorry, Chantal and Barbara. And then Anjali and Stephanie, I'm going to have you guys work together using Skype. Georgette, have you joined us?
Yes. You don't see me?
Georgette, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, you are. Okay, I thought I saw you come in earlier. Okay, so can I have actually Georgette and what did we say before? So Georgette, Chantal, and Barbara, and Stephanie and Anjali. So Georgette, if you call either Barbara or Chantal using your Skype, and you guys do a 3-person conversation, and Stephanie and Anjali. And again, let me kind of go through the task again. On Learning Log 7.1, at the what you're looking at right now are the big headings that you recorded your responses under. So what is your research question? What is your data collection method? What outcomes are you going to measure? What are the specific components of that outcome that you're going to measure? For each component, how will your data method capture the data? And what methods will you use to increase reliability and validity in your study? What I would like you to do is to share what you've recorded in your learning logs and So one person is speaking, one person is listening. The person who's listening, when you respond to what the other person is saying, what I would like you to do is try to use these prompts, I like, I wish, I wonder, as a way to give constructive feedback on the ideas the other person is sharing with you. So again, in just a moment, we're going to sign off. If you need to reach us during your discussion, please raise your hand or use the chat box to send us a message. We're going to let you know when you're halfway through, so that if you're working in a group of 2 or a group of 3, you know that half the time has elapsed. And we'll also let you know when there's 1 minute left, so that you can draw your conclusions, your discussions to a conclusion. Go ahead and get started. And again, we'll check in when there are about 10 minutes left. Hi, everybody. Welcome back again. I apologize. I know that always in those conversations that I'm probably cutting the conversations short just at the time that they're really getting interesting. But I know that all of you have one another's Skype addresses, so I would encourage you, if you really felt that your discussion was cut short, or if there's something that you want to talk further about, to contact other people in the course to do that, because feedback from other people in the course is probably some of the most valuable kind of feedback you can get on the ideas that you have. I also want to say that if any point, it was true leading up to this point, but it certainly is true as we go forward. If at any point you feel that you want to share things with Latifa and I and get feedback, please do that. We did indicate at the beginning of the course that this isn't the kind of course where we're going to be collecting the work that you do and regularly giving you feedback or giving you marks or anything like that. It's really up to you when you want to kind of seek feedback from us. So especially if you are thinking that this idea that you have is something that you're actually going to do, or it could even evolve into a sim project, and you want to involve us at different stages, just to kind of, again, to kind of share your ideas and feedback, please know that we are always here and available to do that. But at this point today, as a part of wrapping up, I wonder if you have any other questions about where we are in the process right now. The discussion we had today about reliability and validity, or how that applies to the work that you described in your learning log. So again, I'll just open it up. Please raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. Anjali.
Hi, I was just thinking about, it's not related to validity and reliability. It's to do with ethical implications of data collection. Because when we tell our students in extended essay research, we tell them there are ethical implications, that you are collecting evidence from people, you're recording observations, you are maybe taking images of them. Do you consider ethical implications? So to what extent are we responsible in our action research to meet those ethical implications? Or are we required to?
Yeah. In a nutshell, you're completely responsible for following those ethical procedures. One of the things about action research, and one of the things that often concerns people when you talk about educational research in schools, action research does not use control groups where the control group is disadvantaged or harmed. And so action research typically is research with the students in your class, not on the students in your class. And so, for example, if you were doing a piece of action research, you would actually disclose that to students, and where appropriate, with parents, with administrators, anyone else who would need to know that you were doing that. And then the whole idea of collecting photographs, of collecting video, that becomes really, it follows the same kind of code of practice that you would use as a teacher in any other activity where you were collecting that kind of information. It has implications for knowing which students can and can't be photographed, even for class purposes. It's understanding what you can do in terms of sharing images or video or other kinds of data that you're collecting. And again, it's not that different than the expectations that are in place for just generally teachers in their professional practice and how you use that information.
So I wonder, there's no mention of these aspects in our action research documentation. And I was just wondering, should there be an element added to that aspect? Because we are only focusing on validity and reliability, but not implications.
That's a really good question, and probably a good suggestion for an improvement that we could make to to not just this learning log, but maybe some of the other ones. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And again, if ever you're in doubt, the best person in your school to talk to, if you think that you might be crossing a line or that you're dealing with a blurred line, your head of school is the best person to go to clarify, whether or not what you're doing in a way that would meet the kind of the ethical kinds of standards that have been set. Other questions or comments? George, I'm sorry. Anyone else? All right.
Okay, everyone. So this brings. Okay, we're almost to the end. So just to remind you that there is this learning log 7.2. I know a lot of you love to go back and listen to the recording, but if you do want to put any learning points there, anything that you want to remember for the future, then it's there should you want to use it. And this brings us to the end of this week's session. As Ben mentioned earlier, he has sent out the Session 8 materials. If you've not received them, please let us know. Tomorrow morning you will receive the joining instructions for next week and the video from today's session. If by Friday you're thinking, why haven't I received that, then please let me know. And we look forward to seeing you all next week and looking forward to having you in person here, Chantel.
And again, next week we're going to be doing some coding and talking about coding qualitative responses. So again, thank you all very much for joining this week, and we will see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.